tariff updates. The US president has also signaled that Phase 2 and Phase 3 of sanctions targeting India are still to come. This follows the initial move to impose secondary sanctions over its continued purchases of Russian oil. The US has imposed a 50% tariff on India's purchases of Moscow's oil, which includes a 25% reciprocal tariff and an additional 25% duty for the oil imports, effective since August the 27th. Let's listen in to Trump's statements.
Okay. How do you know there's no action? Would you say that putting secondary sanctions on India, the largest purchaser outside of China, they're almost equal, would you say there was no action? That cost hundreds of billions of dollars to Russia. You call that no action? And I haven't done Phase 2 yet or Phase 3. But when you say there's no action, I think you ought to get yourself a new job. Because if you remember, 2 weeks ago I said, if India buys, India's got big problems. And that's what happened. So don't tell me about that. Go ahead.
India had earlier criticized the sanctions as unjustified, with Prime Minister Narendra Modi vowing to protect India's economic interests despite growing pressure. We're once again joined by Jayjit Bhattacharya to discuss this further. We just heard from the US president there, Jayjit. Trump has defended himself by saying these sanctions on India are also already hurting the Russian economy. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, as is well known that it's China which is buying the bulk of Russian oil. And the issue is not just the import of oil, it's import of everything. If you look at the Europeans, they are continuing to import in terms of gas. If you look at the US, their imports from Russia has actually gone up. In fact, in terms of calorific value, the amount of uranium that the US is importing is much more in terms of, as compared to what India has been importing. So if you look at the rule of order, if there is any pattern or logic or rationale, and the rationale is that somehow by stopping imports from Russia, one will curtail the ability of Russia to wage war, then that should start from home. So the US should stop importing uranium straight away. And there should be similar tariffs on China and similar tariffs on the Europe, on EU, on Germany, and so on and so forth. But that hasn't happened. So what we believe after deeper analysis of why these tariffs have been put on India and not on China or EU, or why the US has not stopped its own imports from Russia, is because they can. There is no other logic. They tried to put these tariffs on China. China had the leverage of turning off the flow of rare earth magnets, and that impacted the entire automobile industry of the US. Similarly, they cannot take steps against Germany. They cannot take steps against the other European powers. They can do this with India as of now and get away. Obviously, India has dug in its heels and has said that that's not acceptable as to what US has done. Obviously, it's against the WTO regime. So what's the point in having a rule-based order if the rules are not followed, even though the rules were dictated by the US? So it's a very unfair regime that has come up. And therefore, in that context, it's a little perplexing as to what the US president mentioned in terms of taking action, because these actions are not the relevant actions. There's some action, they're almost a random action, but they're not relevant to the cause of stopping Russia from waging war.
Jayjit Bhattacharya, thank you very much for joining us, and a pleasure to get your analysis on that topic. We stay in the United States for our next story, where a US federal judge